A fine day for our gathering. Indeed, the air is invigorating. Shall we proceed to the main event? Yes, let us not delay.
April 1861. The United States is collapsing, states are breaking away, armies are forming, and in Washington a single decision is placed in front of one man that could change everything. Take command of the United States Army, lead the Union, and crush the rebellion before it spreads. The offer is given to Robert E. Lee, one of the most trusted officers in America, a man who had spent his entire life serving the nation. And then, he refuses. Not because he lacks ability, not because he fears war, but because Virginia, his home, has chosen a different path. And in that moment, he makes a decision that will define his life forever. Within weeks, he is no longer defending the United States, he is leading an army against it. What follows is not expected. Facing larger armies, stronger resources, and constant pressure, Lee doesn't just fight, he wins. At the 7 Days Battles, he saves Richmond and forces a retreat. At 2nd Manassas, he splits his army and crushes his opponent. At Fredericksburg, wave after wave of attacks are thrown back. And at Chancellorsville, outnumbered and surrounded, he delivers one of the boldest victories ever fought. For a moment, it feels unstoppable, as if every risk turns into success. But war changes, and one battle, one decision, one moment at Gettysburg will shift everything. From that point on, the war becomes a test not just of strategy, but of endurance, resources, and time itself. This is the story of Robert E. Lee, a commander who reshaped battles, defied expectations, and stood at the center of a war that would define a nation. The victories, the turning points, and the decisions that led from dominance to defeat. This is not just history, this is the rise, the peak, and the fall of one of the most studied military leaders in American history. In the early months of the war in late 1861, Lee's first assignments in Western Virginia are cautious and largely unsuccessful, marked by difficult terrain, poor coordination, and limited engagement. His reputation suffers, and some question whether he is suited for high command. But by June 1862, that changes when he takes command of the Army of Northern Virginia after the wounding of Joseph E. Johnston. What follows begins one of the most aggressive command styles of the war. In June and July 1862, during the 7 Days Battles near Richmond, Lee launches a series of coordinated attacks against the much larger army of George B. McClellan. At Mechanicsville on June 26th, he probes Union positions. Then at Gaines's Mill on June 27th, he commits heavy assaults that finally break Union lines. At Savage's Station on June 29th and Glendale on June 30th, Lee presses constantly, denying McClellan time to reorganize. At Malvern Hill on July 1st, his frontal assaults suffer heavy losses against strong artillery positions, but strategically his campaign succeeds. McClellan retreats from the outskirts of Richmond. Lee has saved the Confederate capital and seized the initiative. In August 1862, Lee turns north against Union General John Pope in the Northern Virginia campaign. He executes a bold plan, sending Stonewall Jackson on a wide flanking march to strike Union supply lines while coordinating with James Longstreet. At the Second Battle of Manassas from August 28 to 30, Jackson holds defensive positions while Longstreet delivers a massive counterattack on the Union left. Lee's decision to divide his army and time the attack precisely results in a decisive Confederate victory, driving Union forces back toward Washington. In September 1862, Lee carries the war into the North during the Maryland Campaign. However, his orders are lost, revealing his plans to McClellan. At the Battle of Antietam on September 17th, Lee fights a defensive battle along Antietam Creek. His forces are stretched thin, and intense combat erupts at the cornfield, the sunken road, and Burnside's bridge. Lee shifts units rapidly across the field to plug gaps and hold the line. Though tactically inconclusive, the battle forces Lee to withdraw to Virginia, marking a strategic halt to his invasion. In December 1862, Lee faces Ambrose Burnside at Fredericksburg. Lee positions his army along elevated defensive ground behind stone walls and fortified ridges. On December 13th, Union forces launch repeated frontal assaults against these positions. Lee's decision to hold strong defensive lines and allow the enemy to attack results in devastating Union casualties and a clear Confederate victory, reinforcing his reputation for defensive strength. In May 1863, at the Battle of Chancellorsville, Lee faces a much larger Union army under Joseph Hooker. In one of his most daring decisions, Lee divides his army again, sending Jackson on a flanking march of nearly 12 miles. On May 2nd, Jackson's surprise attack crushes the Union right flank. Lee continues to apply pressure on May 3rd, forcing Union withdrawal. It is considered one of Lee's greatest victories, achieved against overwhelming odds, though it comes at the cost of Jackson, who is mortally wounded. In July 1863, Lee launches a second invasion of the North, leading to the Battle of Gettysburg. On July 1st, Confederate forces push Union troops through the town to defensive positions on high ground. On July 2nd, Lee orders coordinated attacks on both Union flanks, including fierce fighting at Little Round Top and the Peach Orchard. But these assaults fail to fully break Union lines. On July 3rd, Lee makes the critical decision to launch Pickett's charge, a direct assault across open terrain against entrenched Union positions. The attack fails with heavy losses. Lee is forced to retreat to Virginia, marking a turning point in the war. In May and June 1864, Lee faces a new Union commander, Ulysses S. Grant, in the Overland Campaign. At the Battle of the Wilderness from May 5 to 7, Lee uses the dense forest to neutralize Union numerical advantage, resulting in chaotic and costly fighting. At Spotsylvania Courthouse from May 8 to 21, Lee constructs defensive lines, including the Mule Shoe, and withstands repeated Union assaults, including intense hand-to-hand combat. At Cold Harbor in early June, Lee's entrenched positions repel Union attacks with severe casualties. While tactically successful in these engagements, Lee's army suffers losses it cannot replace. From June 1864 to April 1865, the war transitions into the Siege of Petersburg. Lee defends an extended network of trenches against continuous Union pressure. His strategy focuses on holding key supply lines and delaying Union advances. However, dwindling resources, desertion, and constant attrition weaken his army over time. In April 1865, Union forces break through Confederate lines at Petersburg. Lee evacuates Richmond and begins a retreat westward, attempting to regroup and continue resistance. However, Union forces pursue aggressively, cutting off escape routes. Surrounded near Appomattox Courthouse, Lee recognizes the situation is untenable. On April 9, 1865, Lee meets Grant and surrenders the Army of Northern Virginia.
It is done.
The war in the Eastern Theater effectively comes to an end. For 4 years, Lee fought in nearly every major campaign in the Eastern Theater. He achieved significant victories at the 7 Days Battles, 2nd Manassas, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville, often through bold maneuvers, division of forces, and effective use of terrain. He faced critical engagements at Antietam, Gettysburg, and during the Overland Campaign, where the limits of manpower and resources became decisive. Robert E. Lee's military career during the Civil War remains one of the most studied in history, defined by aggressive tactics, calculated risks, and moments of both success and failure. His story reflects not only battlefield decisions, but the broader realities of a war shaped by strategy, endurance, and the balance of resources over time.